Got it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another one of my Gaudium et Spes 22.com podcasts on Podbean and YouTube videos. I always say I'm excited about a guest, and I am always thrilled with the guests that I'm able to get on my show. But it isn't often that one gets an opportunity to not only interview a legend, but someone who has indirectly been so absolutely formative in my intellectual growth as a theologian and an actual hero of mine, a man who actually literally needs no introduction for most of my viewers, Father Joseph Fessio, SJ, member of the Jesuit order. Father Fessio, thank you so much for coming on here today.
Larry, I'm happy to do it. Especially, I didn't plan this, but if those viewers will look behind Larry, above his head, you see these books with a little kind of on the spine, the little block there. That's Ignatius Press. And then to the left of the screen, you'll see
That's
some
right.
more. So
That's
thank
right.
you, Larry, for being a great customer of Ignatius
Oh, I
Press.
was just going to, and over here are all my Communios, which,
Okay.
it's always opposite on this camera, so I have a hard time.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, between the Communios and all the Ignatius Press books, it's like half my library. And I want to say this, though, too, Father. You are personally responsible for my financial insolvency as a young seminarian, because every single penny and dollar that my parents would send to me for ostensibly for laundry or whatever ended up going to buy the brand newly minted Ignatius Press books. We're gonna get into that, and
Well,
that's actually.
as
Go
long as
ahead.
you weren't like the prodigal son and spending on harlots, I think it's good.
Yeah, it was good, and so anyway, and that's kind of what I want to start. I mean, Father Fessio, is, got his got his master's degree there, in one of them anyway, in France, I believe 1972 at Lyon, studying with Henry de Lubac, and then went on under de Lubac's influence to study with a young theologian named Joseph Ratzinger in Germany to do your doctorate on Hans Urs von Balthasar. So there you go. De Lubac, Ratzinger, von Balthasar, all of whom were still alive, and you got to know all of them. So I just really want to start with that. It would be an absolute shame to have you on the show and not have you basically tell us your personal story, which is kind of encapsulates the history of so much of modern Catholicism. So maybe talk a little bit about De Lubac, Ratzinger, Balthasar, those guys.
Sure. My fame is based on being at the right place at the right time through a very unusual set of circumstances. I was in engineering college. I wanted to go down to South America and work with the poor, building dams and roads, and maybe be a catechist. I thought I found the right woman to go with me because I decided to get married when I was in grammar school on June 3rd, 1962, because three is my favorite number. June is the month for marriage, and I'd be 21 in 1962. I found this beautiful woman, terrific, intelligent, very devout. But it turns out she had already decided to enter the convent. So that was the first step in my life, which I didn't control, that she entered the convent, and well, okay, I'll become a priest. So I'm a priest in the Jesuit, not yet to start as a novitiate, in a seminarian. And when I was teaching in college in 1967 at University of Santa Clara, I got this idea to help poor kids. And I started this program called Project 50, which brought 50 kids on campus from the poor area of San Jose. And it was the 60s. Okay, I grew a beard, tried to grow a beard unsuccessfully. I mean, my beard looked like the top of your head. And and but my superior was upset. So I went to the provincial to say, look, I don't want to be a rebel. I'll shave the beard. And he laughed. He said, have you ever thought about going to Europe for theology? I said, no. Do you want me to think about it? Yeah, okay, I'll think about it. So on the way back from San Francisco to Santa Clara, I decided to go to France for theology because of my beard that I'd shaved. I get to France, and there's de Lubac. After the council, he's an outcast. No one paid attention to him. Well, I paid attention to him. I mean, I was an American for whom an old church was built in like 1922. I'm in France where the church next door was St. Irenaeus' church, okay? 180.
Yeah.
I was overwhelmed by the beauty of the church tradition. He introduced me to the fathers of the church, became my mentor. He didn't teach, but I was kind of his unofficial secretary. So I got to know him well. And you know, Larry, you read books, even books by Larry Chapp, and you don't know who the person is behind him, right? Unless you've met him. And so it's kind of abstract. But I say with de Lubac, I mean, he's warm, he's intelligent, he's got a sense of humor, deep spirituality, loves the church, great priest. I mean, no, I can't say anything about him which is not superlative. When it came time for me to do doctoral studies, I asked him, what should I do it on? He said, Hans Urs Balthasar, the greatest theologian of our time and maybe of all time. Well, coming from him, that was a pretty strong recommendation. So I said, well, where should I do this? He said, there's a young theologian in Regensburg, Father Ratzinger, Professor Ratzinger. He's a friend of mine. I'll write him on your behalf. And so I went to Regensburg and did my doctorate in Ratzinger. At the time, Larry, having read a lot of de Lubac and then got to know Balthasar's works, I thought Ratzinger, a young theologian, was sort of a popularizer, kind of a journalistic. Well, I was very surprised. I mean, those three, I think, are three of the greatest men of the church of our time.
I agree.
By the way, you probably know that Ratzinger was born on April 16, 1927, which was the vigil of Easter Sunday, 4 a.m, 4:30 or so. His mother, a Bavarian strong woman, Mulier Fortis, brings him to the church because in those days they had the vigil in the morning. So he was born between Good Friday and Easter Sunday and baptized 4 hours later. So his whole life was basically supernatural and natural, embedded in the heart of the church's mysterious, mystery and liturgy. That meant a lot to him. And after he declined, his mind never declined. I kind of surmised that he would die on a symbolic date. He died on December 31st, which is the end of the year, but more symbolically, it's the vigil of the feast of Mary, the Mother of God, the solemnity.
Yes. Yes.
And then 2 days after that, you got the feast of Saints Basil and Gregory. So Basil and Gregory were friends. Gregory Nazianzen. Gregory Nyssa was Basil's brother, and those three men were friends. They were scholars, fathers of the church, and in the 4th century, as you know, was a terrible century for the church, the Arian century. They were the bulwarks along with Athanasius. And they now, they basically saved the church's intellectual life and more than that terrible century. I believe before long, de Lubac, born 1896, Balthasar, born 1905, Ratzinger, 1927, they will be all canonized and doctors of the modern church. I won't live to see it, but I think it's going to happen.
Well, that's very encouraging. I would love to see that happen, to see all three of them become doctors of the church. And just randomly here, another name popped into my head. I don't believe that you knew him, but I often wonder what the status of Romano Guardini is in that regard as well.
Well, I didn't know him. He was a decade, a generation before these people I knew. Certainly, he was a great figure in the church, not just the German church, but the church worldwide. I don't know that much about him. I found most of what he wrote kind of impenetrable to me. I wasn't really a great theologian. I did find, of course, Balthasar is pretty deep too. De Lubac can write in a very wonderful literary style that's quite accessible, and Ratzinger more than any of them. I mean, Ratzinger can write in a way that it's like John's Gospel. The Greek is very simple, but the meaning is profound.
Yeah, I mean, Ratzinger has that absolute genius of being able to bring together deep and profound ideas with a very understandable way of writing that was very, very accessible. So anyway, you knew all these giants of the church. Did you have any role to play in the founding of the journal Communiuo? Because I know the three of them, of course, were instrumental in its founding.
I did. I was in de Lubac's room, which by the way, very austere, just a little room, about maybe 12 by 14 with his books and stuff in a desk. in an alcove where he slept on the side. I was in there talking to him, and the phone rang. So I got up to leave the room, and oh no, stay there, he said. And I heard the conversation, his end. Well, no, I'd love to, but I really can't. No, it's impossible. Impossible, can't do it. He hangs up, and I said, well, what was that about? He said, well, that was Cardinal Villot, the Secretary of State. The next meeting of the Papal International Theological Commission's meeting in the fall, and he wants me to come, but I really can't. I'm not well, and I can't go by myself. There's no one to accompany me. I said, well, I'll go with you. Oh, you will? He said, well, sure. So it was my first benefit from the Vatican. I got a free trip to Rome with the Dubac, and accompanied him there to that meeting. And you had Ronner and Bouillet and Balthasar and Ratzinger and others. And they were talking about Communiuo, because as you know, they were all on the board of Concilium, which Skillebeck and Ronner had begun after the council. And then they became very disenchanted with the direction Concilium was taking. So they decided to found Communiuo. And so, Larry, what was I at the time? I was 31 years old or something like that. No, yeah, 31 years old maybe. And, not even a priest, and in my studies, and kind of a naive theologian. I said, well, do you have an American edition plan? No. Well, maybe I can help, So Balthasar gave me the name and contact information of a woman named Audrey. It'll come to me. Andre Emery. Andre Emery, she was the superior prioress of a secular institute called Our Lady of the Way in Los Angeles. And so I came back from ordination year, met with her, and I invited Dave Schindler, who was a friend of mine from philosophy studies in the Society of Jesus, and Father Sheets, whom I knew as a good Jesuit theologian, and Jim Hitchcock, who somehow I knew from somewhere else. And we had a meeting there in Los Angeles, and that was the beginning of Communiuo, the American edition. So I kind of was a catalyst for it. But my role in life, Larry, I've discovered over many, many decades now, is to make work for others. And so I planted the seed, and then I left, and they did all the work.
Yeah, well, it's a heck of a seed, because I have to say, I mean, speaking personally, once again, that having access to the English edition, the American edition of the journal Communiuo, was so instrumental in my own intellectual formation. I entered seminary in 1978. It was college seminary, and I was there 1 month or 2 months, whatever it was, when John Paul II gets elected, and I had been raised up in the beige Catholicism of the post-Vatican II era, and was looking for something more, something different. And even though I was so inspired by John Paul intellectually, I was a bookish, sort of intellectually precocious young seminarian, and I was just desperate for some substance. And I had a spiritual director. It was a Holy Ghost father. You may have known him, Father Anton Morgenroth. I don't know if you ever knew.
I knew him. Yes, wonderful man.
Yes. He was my spiritual director. And I was sitting there one day, he was playing the piano, and he got done. And then that thick German accent, he says, "Here, wait a minute." And he went to his shelf and he pulled a copy of Love Alone, Glaubhaus ist nur Liebe in German, and threw it at me. And he says, "Here, read this. It will make you less stupid." And and I did. I devoured it in one. And that was not Ignatius Press book at the time, because Ignatius Press was just getting started. And we're going to get into that in a second. I don't mean to dominate the conversation here. But then the next thing that Morgenroth did was introduce me then to the journal Communiuo. And then my whole intellectual life just exploded and changed at that moment. So I owe a lot to you, Father Fessio, for being instrumental in that. And then Ignatius Press comes along, and there's so much we could talk about the founding of the St. Ignatius Institute at the University of San Francisco that you had a hand in, and so on. But when we can talk about that if you really want to, but I'd like to move on to the founding of Ignatius Press and how that came about. 1978, right?
Yes, that's when we incorporated our first publications. Were 1979 January, Woman in the Church by Bouillet and Heart of the World by Balthasar. Well,
Father Simeon translated that.
yeah,
Erasmo.
Erasmo Leva Americakis. That's right. A wonderful translator, a wonderful man, person, now priest. So, Larry, when I was young, for some reason, I didn't drink. Even when I went to Santa Clara, which is a Jesuit all men's school at the time, a lot of drinking going on. Uh, and when I got to Europe in 1969, I began to drink wine at the meals, where you take a little ordinary wine and mix it with water. And that was when I realized that wine is not alcohol. It's not a drink. It's a food that goes along with a meal to make it a full meal. Just like the Last Supper was a full meal, partly because of the wine there. Then I went to Germany after that for 2 years in Germany, and I began drinking beer in Bavaria. And I discovered 13 different kinds of beer, not brands, but kinds, Märzen beer, Pilsner, Bock, Double Bock, so on, Weizen beer. And you're probably old enough, Larry, to know what a milkman is,
Yeah,
where
I am.
you put out the milk bottles and they come and take the empties and put in the new
That's right.
bottles.
And the
Well,
bread man.
okay, well, in Bavaria, they got the beer man. You put out your little plastic case of a big, 1.5 liter bottles of beer, and you come back from work that day, and there you got your fresh beer. So I began to drink beer in Germany, and I came back to the United States. It might have been my ordination year, and someone handed me, I'm going to say it, a Budweiser, okay? And I took a sip and I spat it out. And I said, if you're going to call this beer, I need another name for what I drank in Germany, because we're not in the same genus even. Okay, well, when I came back from my studies after my doctorate, I was giving retreats to nuns a lot. And I would be quoting from de Lubac and Balthasar and so on. And at one of these retreats in a question and answer session, a nun said, well, Father Fesio, you've talked about all these European theologians. Who are the great American theologians? I told him the beer story. And I said, we got some theologians here. You weren't there yet, Larry, so I couldn't refer to you. But I said, especially moral theology, they're pretty good there. But if you're going to call them theologians, I need another name for what I had in Europe,
Yeah.
At that same time, I'd founded the Institute at USF, and a good friend, John Galton, did it with me. A layman, very well read in spiritual and theological things. We'd have a reading group, And every so often, I'd take a paragraph from de Lubac or Balthasar, I didn't inspire, and I'd translate it for them. And John said, Father Fessio, he said, this must be made available in English. We can't keep this treasure from Catholics here. So that's when we decided to found Ignatius Press. Well, not the first thing we did. We had Erasmo Leva Americakis, Father Simeon, translate Adrian from Inspire's book, They Followed His Call. And I sent it to St. Paul Publications in Staten Island, and they decided to publish it. And about a year later, Frank Sheed. Now, Frank Sheed was the dean of Catholic publishers in the English-speaking world, with Sheed and Ward.
Sheed and Ward.
His wife was Maisie Ward. And he lived in New Jersey, but he was from Australia. Every year he'd go back, and come back. He'd go through San Francisco. So we had him come and give a talk to our students. And one afternoon, I was walking along with him. We'd done this book by Adrian from Inspire. And I said, well, Mr. Sheed, do you think we should keep doing this, translating books and going to other publishers? But should we start our own publishing business? He said, oh, by all means. He said, start your own, but be ready for 10 years of grief. So that's when we decided to start Ignatius Press. We knew nothing about publishing books. What we did, we went to the library and we picked out books we liked the size, We picked out books we liked the typeface. We picked out books we liked the paper. And we decided, okay, we're going to use Bembo typeface. We're going to use natural paper. Here's going to be our formats, And then we found out, it was a whole long story about how that happened, but we started Ignatius Press just like that, not knowing much. I got a grant for $24,800 from the Durancy Foundation in Milwaukee, Harry John, and that was what we used to publish our first two books. Anyway, that's how we started.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I'm looking around here for, let's see. Oh, at the
Well,
very top, which you cannot see. Hang on. Let me see. There. Those are all the Balthazar books right there.
oh
That's the
yeah, okay,
that's the without the I always take off the paper dust
okay, that's
jacket.
fine.
But
Okay.
yeah, the entire trilogy. You bankrupted me, but thank you so much. I remember getting in my hands volume one of the Theological Aesthetics. I think you guys published that in 1981 or three. One of those years.
Okay.
And I just devoured it, and I thought, oh, I couldn't wait. And then I became friends with Adrian Walker, and he
Oh,
translated, yeah,
yes. Yeah.
a great many of those things. But anyway, thank you so much for starting Ignatius Press and putting this all out there. But because you're so right, I think that, and this is what I want my viewers to understand about the importance of what you've done, Father, in founding Ignatius Press. This isn't just any old press. I love that beer analogy, Budweiser versus all these beautiful German beers, because there was this absolute deficit of profound theology in, I think, the English speaking world in general, but certainly in the United States. And into that breach came Ignatius Press and brought us not just Balthasar, but de Lubac and Ratzinger and Louis Bouillet. I learned about Bouillet through Ignatius Press, and Joseph Pieper, and on and on and on. The entire ressourcement school of theological discourse got introduced to American readers. And I think it is one of the most important events in the history of American Catholicism, the founding of Ignatius Press and the introduction into the bloodstream of America's theological discourse, these great European thinkers.
I hope at the Last Judgment you'll speak up for me.
Yeah, I will if I'm there. I mean, if yeah,
You'll be there. You'll be
yeah, I'll
there.
be there. I mean, if you'll be in heaven, I'll be in the lower reaches of purgatory, no doubt. Absolutely, absolutely. No, but this isn't just hagiography for an ecclesial hero of mine. It's absolutely true. The importance of Ignatius Press, but I do remember when I got to Fordham University to get my doctorate, and I started there in 1980, spring of 1989, spring semester. And one of the Jesuits there, Father William Dyke, you may have known, Bill Dyke, DYCH. He was a friend of Ronner's or something. He saw me sitting in the lounge there, the theology lounge at Fordham, and I was reading volume one of the Theological Aesthetic, looking over my notes, and he saw me reading that, and he told me that the founding of Ignatius Press was the worst thing that happened to the American Catholic Church.
Okay.
And he said that because he hated Balthasar with a passion. Hated Balthasar with a passion. Yeah. He was straight up Ronerian, and so, which of course is not an attitude Ronner himself would have had, right?
No, I mean they were friends for a while. They clashed theologically. Cordula, he criticized Ronner, but the thing is, when I was going through the seminary period, 10 years before you were, Ronner was in the ascendant, and Lonergan was in English-speaking world. They have pretty much disappeared from the scene right now. What really encourages me is like your student, Sarah Hulse Kirby, and many others in the John Paul II Institute. I mean, there's a renewal going on. There's a revival. And in de Lubac, yeah. Balthasar, Ratzinger, they're at the center of it,
Yeah, they are. And that's why I credit Ignatius Press with so much of an influence in the American Catholic Church, because there has been an absolute explosion, a renaissance of young Catholic theologians, both male and female, that are entering into the main bloodstream of the church's theological life in this country, precisely because of reading Ratzinger, Balthasar, de Lubac, and this. And I fear, though,
but
that even though
only those two categories, male and female.
Yeah, well, I'm hopelessly binary in my thinking. I guess I need to get beyond that into our the z, they, them, all that stuff. Yeah, I really think however, and I was talking with David C. Schindler, and we can move in now into maybe some more current topics. I was talking with David C. Schindler about the fact that his fear that despite the fact that there is this encouraging pockets of theological discourse in the American church among some young theologians, David C. Schindler is worried that Communiuo theology, ressourcement theology in general, are in danger of being forgotten and eclipsed in the current climate. What do you think of that?
I totally disagree. It doesn't take long for things to go bad. It takes a lot longer to restore things, get better. But one of the things that really areas the church really in trouble in the 1970s were the seminaries. And there were only 3 seminaries in the country at that time, and I can name them, where you could reliably send good young men for formation. There's been a turnaround. I mean, there's so many good seminaries now. St. Patrick's here in San Francisco, where Adrian Walker, as you mentioned, Margaret Turek, and so many others. And if you ask seminary rectors and bishops, do you have how many John Paul II seminaries have? Well, we have lots of them. What about Benedict seminarians? Lots of them. How about Francis seminarians? Not a single one, at least not yet. The young priests, young seminarians now, they are getting a great formation, and they're reading Balthasar back in our books and so on. So I am not, first of all, I think in terms of quantity, I think the ressourcement, the communal theology is in the ascendant and it's growing. But even if it weren't, Jesus did a lot with 12 or 11, as it turned out.
Yeah.
And I just think if we have, the truth has a splendor to it, across Balthasar's whole aesthetics. And this draws people in, and it's contagious. So it's not a fad. It's not some kind of theology this was in the mid 20th century, whatever, late 20th century. This is a restoration of the vital life of the early church, the fathers and the early theologians, the spiritual writers, the saints. It's never going to go away.
Yeah, I'm so encouraged to hear you say that, and I agree with you. There has been this great reformation of seminaries. I mean, I hope that one of the 3 seminaries you thought were sound was the one I attended, which was Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Yeah, that was one of the 3. Yeah, the other 2 were St. Joseph's in Dunwoody and St. Charles in Overbrook.
St. Charles in Philadelphia, which, by the way, my wife Carrie, who you've met and know, is returning to St. Charles Seminary as their dean of religious studies.
Really?
Beginning in August. Yes. Wonderful. So she's going to have a hand in, which is kind of their master's degree program for non-seminarians, and she'll be in charge of that. And of course, and so and I know I still have a lot of friends at Mount St. Mary's and know people at Dunwoody and now at Menlo Park. But I gave a talk out at St. Meinrad Seminary last year and was utterly impressed with the Communiuo style theologians, that Keith Lemna, Cerullo, guys like this. It's just incredible what they've been. And when I was in seminary at Mount St. Mary's, we made jokes about St. Meinrad's, because they were liberal, loosey-goosey. And now look at that place. It is now doing really, really well.
Well, the measure of its orthodoxy is that they invited Larry Chapp. I mean, you're not exactly an unknown figure, and you're not uncontroversial. So for them to invite you, that's it's like inviting Trump or something like that.
Oh my. That's something. Yeah. I'm a bit of a lightning rod because I speak my mind and don't pull back, don't hold any punches. So I never thought of it that way. The mere fact that they invited me out there maybe speaks volumes. And there's also then outside of seminaries, to make your point even stronger. I mean, I gave a talk at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And look at what they're doing.
Yeah, your talk wasn't as well received as Butler's was, but you don't mean the kicker.
Yeah.
All
right. Yeah. That was really something. I never actually got around to reading his speech. I just read the media reports about it, which of course were almost universally negative. But
well, Steve Minnis has been president there for about 20 years, and he's just a terrific Catholic layman, even though he was a lawyer. But Benedictine is one among many. The Newman Guide schools, about 20 of them, they're all flourishing. Well, one of them went down. Magdalene went out of business, but that was a very small operation.
Yeah. And sadly, my former place of employment, DeSales University near Allentown, has been removed from the Newman Guide.
That's right.
And for good reasons, not because of the theology department, which remains sound and intact, but also now besieged. You mentioned Sarah Hulse Kirby. She teaches there. She occupies my former office, believe it or not. And but they've gone the way of woke, and sadly. So, and I don't know how they're doing in Roman wise. But anyway, enough of that. The point is to get back to, I think what David C. Schindler was talking about was, I think, more in the overall sort of Western world, how much of an impact is Communiuo theology having in the Catholic Church? I don't know. I'd have to talk. I don't want to put words in Dave's mouth. I just remember him saying that. But I think, and the reason why I bring this up is, and then you can comment on this, I really think that Communiuo theology represents the best path forward for both implementing the Second Vatican Council and for, in a sense, retrieving tradition for the modern church. I've held that position for 40 years, and I still hold that point of view. What would it's kind of doing it now. There are certain schools of Thomistic thought that think that Communiuo theology, rooted in de Lubach's theology of nature and grace, is too modernist or subjectivist or something or other. But I still think Communiuo theology is the way forward.
Yes, well, it's interesting. Sarah Hulse Kirby wrote an article last year on the 7 myths about de Lubac.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the things was that he was part of the new theology, which was criticized by Gary Lagrange and others. And she made a statement, which I think is classic. It should be more widespread. She said, well, actually, de Lubac was really restoring the old theology of Thomas. It was Gary Lagrange and the Neo-Thomists who had the new theology. And so, will Communiuo be long-lasting? Of course it will, because it's not a school in the sense of a group that has a particular point of view. They are portals, I would call them, into the fullness of the Church tradition. They love Thomas Aquinas, but they love Bonaventure, they love Augustine, the Fathers, Origen, and so on, as well as they're totally conversant with modern thought, with German philosophy and existentialism and so on. So, I think as the church goes on, deepening the one deposit of faith, which is unchangeable, I think that Communiuo theology, both in terms of content, which is enriched by the whole tradition. And by the way, the theologians in Communiuo, like de Lubac, they're not just theologians, they're philosophers, they're cultural people, they understand literature.
Yes.
And so it's a fullness of human culture, inspired and enlivened by the Catholic faith. And so the content will last forever because it's the content of the church up to this point. The form will last forever because it's a form of accepting everything which is good, which the church has brought forth in her history. So call it Communiuo, but it's not a 20th century phenomenon. This is simply theology, my view.
Yeah, that's my view as well. And that what Communiuo and Renaissance theology restored was simply an older way of doing theology. That was actually the way of doing theology for maybe 1700 years, and maybe until Suarez came along. I don't know. I don't. Intellectual genealogies are complex. So what caused modern Catholic theology to kind of go off the rails is a complicated story.
Well, also, the idea of Communiuo, cum unio, with union.
Yeah.
Balthasar has a wonderful book called Einfaltungen, he called it, which is an invented German word. Entfaltungen means to unroll things, Einfaltungen means to roll them in together. And he has this picture of the church, her thinking, her thought, her theology is going like a tree where the branches start to get farther and farther apart. You get pastoral theology here, and canon law over here, and dogmatic theology there, and scripture. He said, no, it's always got to be unified. And it's true, I think, what the scholastic period did and what Thomas Aquinas did, kind of codify it and classify it. But that led to these this division of topics that were kind of hermetically
Yeah.
sealed in their silos, in that it produced a lot of good things, but it has to be brought together into a whole. It's like what I think Ratzinger did in his book on Jesus of Nazareth. He accepts the historical critical method for what it's done, although he does say, I think it's run its course. He says that. But the point is, you got to use the findings of modern exegesis and the spiritual understanding of the fathers and see them together. You can't separate those things.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned modern theology entering into its silos. My good friend, the patristic scholar Louis Ayres, Augustine scholar of many things. Louis refers to the demise of modern Catholic theology as precisely that, the siloization of theology, and therefore that it just becomes a bunch of disparate, aggregated, unaffiliated, not rolled into one another discourses.
Yeah.
And even Rahner recognized this, although he used it for, I think, bad purpose. In other words, Rahner said we're all essentially now dilettantes theologically, because there's no way any one of us can master all of these siloed disciplines. That's precisely one of the reasons why he developed his transcendental method, he said, was in a sense to develop something that was behind all of those. It's sort of the raison d'etre of how they all sort of unfold. And I think that was a bad move on his part, but even he sort of recognized we have to get back to some kind of unifying principle. I just think he chose the wrong unifying principle.
Yeah, I agree with that. And because it wasn't the concrete universal of Jesus Christ. It was more the
right
abstract universal transcendental thought. That's right.
Yeah, but to go back though to the fact that the ressourcement guys are retrieving something, I always tell people Balthasar quoted Thomas Aquinas more than any other author. Balthasar considered Aquinas's distinction between essence and existence to be one of the greatest achievements, and if not the greatest achievement in the history of metaphysics. I think he says that in volume 5 of volume 5 in the English Ignatius Press version of the Aesthetics. And of course, de Lubac spent his entire career exegeting Thomas Aquinas on the nature and grace. So the insinuation, right, that the ressourcement guys are anti-Thomas Aquinas is just simply historically wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, since this is so still important to us now today, this research, I'd like to shift gears. We have maybe about another 15 minutes or so that I'd like to go. And I haven't vetted this with you in advance, so if you don't want to go into this territory, feel free to say no. But I'd like to talk a little bit about liturgy, because I know you are interested in liturgy as well. I happen to attend, even though I'm a cradle Catholic, I'm not supposed to, but I attend an Anglican ordinariate parish, simply because I think the liturgy is so astoundingly beautiful. I'm not opposed to the Mass of Paul VI. I'm not opposed to the traditional Latin Mass. And yet there are now rumors floating around here and there that the Vatican is about to suppress the Latin Mass and the old Latin Mass entirely. Those are rumors. I don't know if it's true or not. What are your thoughts on the state of the modern day liturgy, Father?
First of all, I'm glad you like the ordinary Mass. The bishop is a former student of mine, Steve Lopes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. He's from San Francisco.
Yeah. So how can I sum this up? Because I was ordained in 1972, Mass facing the people, English, folk songs. And for some reason, even the beginning of that, I thought, I don't like facing the people. I'm praying to God with them. I mean, there's something wrong here. But it was kind of in the background, kind of subliminal type thing. And I went on for years that way. But it started out that we were having Mass in the Jesuit chapel at University of San Francisco. It's a nice little chapel, but it looks kind of like a hotel lobby, and then the rug in there and these plush chairs and no pews and that sort of thing. But they had beautiful crucifix and tabernacle there. But at a certain point, and I had the two boys who were sons of people working at Ignatius Press here, Thomas and Stephen Dudrow, would serve my Mass. They'd come in and get their little regular clothes on. And at some point, I read something, well, we should have some Gregorian chant So with the Novus Ordo, English facing the people, I introduced Kyrie and the Sanctus on the state. Once we started doing that, we felt that, wait a minute, we're being too informal here with other things. Let's get little castics and things for the servers, which we did. And then across the street was a Carmelite monastery. And they had an altar, beautiful baldacchino altar, but it was facing the same way. It wasn't facing east because of where it was on a corner. It was actually facing west. But so then we started having mass ad orientem, or ad altare, or whatever. And it began to feel so right for me. Well, I was asked to give a talk in Colorado Springs in 1995, March 25th, Our Lady's Annunciation to Our Lady. And there was a talk there given by Father Brian Harrison, Ordo Sapientiae, Order of Wisdom, called On the Reform of the Roman Liturgy. And his talk really struck a chord with me. And his basic thesis is that what the council did was a result of a century-long preparation for liturgical renewal. What happened after the council hijacked it, and what we have to do now is we see what's happened. Let's go back to what the Mass was before the council. Let's look at what the council actually wanted, and let's reform the reform. And he said, the answer is not to go to the extraordinary form. It was, not called that then, but the old Mass as it was, that's not the answer, although it's legitimate. Nor is the answer, let's be more rubrical and just follow the rubrics. The answer is to reform the rubrics. So anyway, I wrote to Carlo Raschi, who at that time was prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith. I got the letter here somewhere, I think. Let's see.
Oh, so cool.
I wrote this long letter to him. Yeah. And way too verbose, But I sent him this article by Father Harrison, which is about 30 pages, double spaced. Asked me, if you want to read it. And so I get this response back a month later. Lieber Pater Fessio, endlich komme ich dazu, Ihnen für blah, 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 German. So what he's saying is, dear Father Fessio, I'm finally able to thank you for your kind letter of April 19th. By the way, this is 1995. He wrote his Spirit of Liturgy between 1990 and 1999. So this is right in the middle of that. I want to thank you for your kind letter. In the meantime, I've been able to read Father Harrison's contribution, with which I unreservedly agree. Mit dem ich uneingeschränkt zustimme, he says, okay? He shows, in my judgment, the way that can lead to the genuine reform of the reform. So that's where this idea came from, taught by Harrison, confirmed by Ratzinger. As I already said at the time in my foreword to the French edition of the little book by Gambert on the direction of the celebration, I believe that we need a new liturgical movement, which of course must be absolutely inspired and directed in the right manner. So he supported that. So here's what I've done, Larry. It's very lonely in the middle, as you know.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to the extraordinary form. I think it's a beautiful thing, but I also think that it was intended to be reformed in an organic way. I'm not opposed to the Novus Ordo, but there's so many options, as well as abuses, but even just the options, that you have all sorts of variations of it. So what I did, and I provocatively called it the Mass of Vatican II, and I got a little booklet that has that name on it, is I took all the options in the Novus Ordo, and wherever there was an option, I chose the one closest to the Mass before the Council. Yeah. And so I used Latin for the ordinary. All the unchanging parts are in Latin. Changing parts, the collect and the offertory and the readings, of course, everything, are in English. I use the first canon. We face east. We have male altar servers. We have kneelers for communion. We sing a Gregorian chant. And so I celebrate the Novus Ordo Mass, the Mass of Paul VI. But if you walked in the middle of it, you wouldn't be sure whether it was extraordinary form or not. And so I'm not the only one doing this, but I believe this corresponds most closely with Ratzinger's view in his book, which I think is the greatest book ever written on the liturgy. So that's my view, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I like your view. And the way you just described celebrating Mass, the Mass of Paul VI, in that way, it reminds me a lot. That's why I love the ordinariate liturgy that I attend. It's Mass ad Orientem, but the prayers are Eucharistic Prayer 1, the old Roman canon. Prayers are prayed out loud, which I think is a reform that was needed. And more, and of course there's dialogical responses from the congregation, which I think was a reform that was needed.
Yes.
But also then we have a choir with beautiful chant. It's Anglican plain chant, not Gregorian chant, and yet it's still quite beautiful. We receive communion kneeling at an altar rail on the tongue with intinction. So you get the picture. It's high liturgy. And I just can't escape the impression, as every single time I attend one of these liturgies, that this is very close to the Mass that the fathers of the Second Vatican Council probably had in mind.
Absolutely. No question about it. There was nothing said at all in the council about turning the altar around or about different canons. And to me, that's the one thing which is most critical, is that the facing the people is an innovation. It wasn't done in 1969 ever anywhere in the church except by rare exceptions, and it came in after Luther in the Lutheran church. But to me, the drama, the beginning of Mass, oh, by the way, Ratzinger thinks this is important too. It was important to separate the ambo from the altar, liturgy of the word from liturgy of the Eucharist. And so at the beginning of Mass, the priest represents God to the people. The readings are proclaimed. There's dialogue there, as you say, especially with the responsorial psalm. Another, by the way, introduced by the council, I think was wonderful. And by the way, the reading cycle, I think, more readings, especially during the week, from different parts of Scripture. All that was beautiful, wonderfully done. But the point is, the beginning of Mass, the priest is speaking on behalf of God to the people. Then comes the offertory. People bring their gifts up. Priest takes them. Now he turns and faces the rising sun, the risen Christ, coming towards us. He's now representing the people and himself towards the Father. Consecration takes place, not the high point of the Mass, in my view. The high point is communion, where now the priest turns back to the people. Their gifts have become the body and blood of Christ, and Christ, the bridegroom, not just the head, Christ, the bridegroom, now gives himself entirely to his bride, the church, kneeling before him. I mean, the drama of that is so beautiful. And I think it's completely obliterated when you have this Mass in the round, Anyway.
Oh, yeah. It's also obliterated when you fill the sanctuary with people in street clothes and things like, Eucharistic minute. Like in our ordinary parish, we only have male altar servers, and they are in cassock and in
surplice
and a kota.
Okay.
The shorter little one for the. I'm actually an adult altar server, and so I wear a surplice. The longer, and we have deacons and subdeacons and the whole 9 yards, and yet everybody is dressed liturgically proper. There's no informality about it. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, by the way, on that top, just a little thing. De Lubac and Balthasar and Ratzinger were very close friends. In European language, you got the formal U and the informal U, like
do and Z. Yeah.
Do and Z, or usted and du in Spanish, and so on. Yeah. They never tutoyed each other. They always used the formal language. And yet they were deeply, closely, intimately associated as friends. But there was always that sense of dignity there,
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm a West Coast, cowboy riding type guy, very informal.
Yeah.
But I think the Mass should have a beautiful, consistent formality to it when we're speaking to God.
I agree. One last question on liturgy, Father, before we move on is, yeah, I mean, you knew Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and you consider his book Spirit of the Liturgy one of the greatest books on the liturgy ever written. I agree.
The greatest.
The great, and I agree. I agree with that. It's better than Guardini's book of the same title. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So the thing, and I know that Pope Benedict issued Summorum Pontificum. I know he gave us a new English translation uh, for our mass in the English speaking world. But I do wonder, and this has always perplexed me, of any modern pope, he was probably the one most gifted and most suited to actually, in a sense, engaging in a serious reform of the liturgy. How hard would it have been for him to simply say, I encourage everyone to start praying ad orientem. I'm not going to mandate it, but I'm going to start doing it at the Vatican. I encourage bishops to do it. I encourage why do you think he didn't take more strong steps in that direction?
I think partly because he was very, very respectful of other opinions from his own. He did not want to impose his theology, even his view of the liturgy, on others. He hinted at it. It's clear in his books. He wrote, but he was, liberals tend to, when they get power, they make changes overnight without any consideration, consultation, whatever. But true conservatives don't do that. And he was not only conservative in the good sense, but he was also very gentle, very respectful. I mean, even those who hated him respected his intellect, So, and also, he didn't want to be pope. He didn't want to be bishop. He didn't want to be pope. He did that because he was called to do it. And he's not an administrator. He's a thinker. He's a speaker. But he had good people under him. I mean, for many years. That was helpful. But anyway, that's my speculation on that.
No, I think you're right. I have had other friends of mine say, "Oh, it's probably because he just met such stiff resistance from bad forces in the Vatican. His hands were tied." No, I think you've nailed it, and I think it's an extremely important point, especially to counter this awful narrative of depends a cardinal. And, every single time, and like in the secular media, where you see Benedict described, he's always described as an arch conservative, a doctrinaire hardliner, and I don't know, probably from his days with the CDF, where he came down a little bit on liberation theology. Oh, poop-de-doo. I mean, come on. The guy was not the Panzer Cardinal, nor was John Paul. If anything, John Paul II was even less of a rigorous disciplinary than Ratzinger.
Yeah, I wish he had been myself, but I mean, anyway, he wasn't.
Yeah, I think George Weigel said to me once, John Paul was a great priest, a mediocre. No, he was a great prophet, a decent priest, but a lousy king.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's true of John Paul, but he had things going on. But anyway, the point is that I think that it's a mischaracterization of conservatives to say, "Oh, you're the authoritarians," and yet, I mean, look at the current papacy, which is clearly a little more liberal, ruled by motu proprio. Who saw traditionis custodes coming? Who saw fiducius supplicans coming? It just came out of the woodwork, out of nowhere.
Well, Larry, this is a synodal church, don't you understand?
Synodal, yes. We're all. Can you tell me what synodalism is, Father?
Yeah, it's a smokescreen for authoritarianism.
Yes, it's rather Orwellian, isn't it? That the words mean the exact opposite. But anyway, I don't want to get you into too much trouble here. So maybe.
All right.
Although I don't think you're adverse to being a bit of a troublemaker, but yeah, I don't want to get you, because I didn't vet any of this with you in advance, and so I don't want to go down those rabbit holes. But we've been at this about an hour. I want to thank you for coming. Is there any last topic you want to bring up? Any last words?
Sure. I want everybody to make their library look like Larry Chapp's with all his Ignatius books on it. Go to ignatius.com and buy these great books. one little thing, just one little last thing, Larry, on a different topic, but related.
Sure.
When you went to grammar school, they probably had scholastic book fairs. They did when I went to grammar school.
Yes, we
And
did.
Scholastic, they have 120,000 book fairs every year. Okay, so $1.6 billion company. And for years, for decades, they've had wonderful books for children. Exciting books, get them to read adventure stories, history, biography, and all that. They've gone uber woke, okay? And they're in all the Catholic schools, 5,000 Catholic grammar schools, 95% of them anyway. So this year, 2024, Ignatius Press started Ignatius Book Fairs. And we are doing the same thing Scholastic does, except our books are different. We have good, wholesome, non-religious books. We also have Catholic books. So anybody listen here, you got kids in a Catholic school, tell them about Ignatius Book Fairs, because, we want to try and help young people to read and read good things, because they're not going to read Balthasar later on unless they learn to read and to have a standard by which to judge good reading. Anyway, that's my little plug for.
No, good. Everybody go, anybody involved in Catholic education, go to Ignatius Press and get involved with that. And I also would be remiss, because I've been asked by the good friends of mine down at Communiuo. I'm on the editorial board of Communiuo now, and they have asked me to make very clear to everyone out there that Communiuo is currently going through a kind of a sale for subscriptions for all kinds of things. So go to the Communiuo webpage, just type in Google Communiuo International Catholic Review. You can go to their main homepage and look up all of the great deals that Communiuo has going right now. So there's good things happening in the Catholic publishing world. Absolutely.
Yes, many good things. All right. Thank you, Larry. Keep up the good work.
Hey, well, thank you, Father, and keep up the winemaking.
All right. God bless you. Come on out here and taste them sometime. All right.
I will. Bye-bye.